Anime fans from the 90s and 2000s, and
Mm-hmm.
even before that, I find that they had no problem going back to watch older shows. If
Yeah.
you watched Gundam Wing or Gundam
Mm-hmm.
Seed, you wanted to see the Gundams that came before it.
Yeah.
Now it's like I know people who watched Iron Blooded Orphans and that was too old for them. And they refuse to go back to Double O or any other series. And like just like you said with like any sort of rom-com, any sort of sci-fi, any sort of shonen, if it isn't something that came out within like the last 5 years or so, they're not going back. Like they refuse to. And like that's for me is part of my disconnect with anime fans,
Yeah,
because
big time.
if you have so much resources at your fingertips, you can watch legitimately anything that has ever come out. Why not go back to see the nucleus of this show that you think is so great? Like why do they refuse to?
Well, and it's daunting, right? Like somebody asked me to where to start with Gundam, and I will tell them watch the compilation movies, and they'll be like, "Oh wow, when did those come out?" And I'd say 1980, and they'd be like, "That's older than I am. That's older than you are." And I would be like, "Well, yeah, but also shut up and do it." It's there's so much out there that I think the immediacy of it being like, okay, this is what's new. This is what people are talking about on Twitter. I want to be a part of that conversation. Like, yeah, no, okay, dive right in. Okay, I will watch this one thing. And then they get used to what that is in their head. They get used to what that anime, this is what anime is to me, sort of thing. Whereas to you and I, it's, it's Gundam and it's Harlock and it's Maytel Legend and it's Macross and it's this and it's that and that. And it, there's this huge breadth of it, whereas they're like this laser focused folks looking at, one or two shows that are popular and maybe some niche stuff that they've stumbled into. And then that's their comfy place. Like you ask them to watch Lord of the Rings and they'll be like, oh, this CG is crap. I'm like, well, yeah, but you don't understand what it. I tried, a friend of mine was like, oh, I love Star Wars. I'm like, oh, wow. Have you ever seen it with, without the special edition stuff in it? And she was just like, well, no. And I showed it to her and she's like, this movie sucks. I'm like,
Oh my god.
no more questions, no more tears, just sleep, sort of thing, just, like, it's this huge disconnect between people who have only been exposed to this certain thing. Like, and I don't think that folks like you and me are like a dying generation or anything, but we are less vocal about it. Like, for reference, before quarantine and all that stuff, I would run History of Mecha panels at cons all across the Midwestern United States and on, in Boston. It's mostly in Boston, but I would fill rooms with it. And there were people who I looked at and I said, okay, you're not a, old man. Like you're a reasonably young human being who seems to be interested in this. Great, cool. And I like, the entire panel room is packed with people. I'm like, yes, these humans are the good ones. These are the ones who will be saved. But they weren't all a bunch of oldsters. They weren't cantankerous old men who remember when it used to be called Japanimation and they could order it out of a back catalog sort of thing. Like the interest is there. It's just the space to speak on it is not. And especially since, and I say this all the time, like I challenge people who keep up on modern shows to name something that came out 2 years ago that had any impact on them whatsoever. And, unless it's a big franchise tentpole title, usually they can't do it. Like it's just the social media has the memory span of a goldfish, and it's doing the rounds on legacy media, basically. There's my disconnect, I guess.
Wow. Thank you for all of that. That's very well put. It's interesting that you say that, though. I never thought of it from that perspective, that we're not very vocal. While you're right, we're not a dying breed. I do feel that what anime once was has shifted so much that it's in danger of never swinging back to how it was once considered. Anime to me seems so digestible. It's like it's something you watch for this season because everyone else is watching it, or this Anituber told you to watch it, and then you move on. But anime is more than that. Like Code Geass for me was an interesting series because none of my friends were into Code Geass because they were like, it's all over the place. This looks like Cardcaptor Sakura, but is this a mech show? How come they don't fight in mechs? How come these girls are so weird? What's up with Lelouch? He doesn't seem like a great main character. But that sort of story, to me, it wasn't convoluted. It was an interesting tone setter, and I could see where it pulled from other series of the past. And even then, I knew this is something special. When Madoka came out, I love Magical Girl, and even though I personally find Madoka to be a magical girl in the subgenre, not so much like the main aesthetic of it, I appreciated what it was doing, how interesting it was. There are so many series from the late 90s to the late 2000s-ish that to me meant so much, and those conversations I will always remember for the rest of my life because they dictated how my 20s looked and the relationships that I built through them, the friendships, even some of the job opportunities I had. Now everyone who considers themselves an anime fan, they want to do Anitube, and for them doing Anitube means that you have to watch what the most recent show is. You can't do anything that's not popular. Analytical anime is basically adhering to what other Anitubers want to hear, and to me, like it just doesn't make sense. We're now creating this commodity out of anime instead of appreciating the art form, and I can't stand that. I don't want to see that happen.
Well, I mean, we're in this situation where mass audiences don't appreciate a film like a critic would, right? But a critic doesn't appreciate a mass appeal movie. It's this weird disconnect because you want to be connecting with an audience, but at the same time you want to be, I hate to say smarter than the audience, but you want to be giving them something that they hadn't thought of before, something they hadn't considered. But anime right now is becoming commoditized in such a way that it's like it sucked the soul out of it because they're only concerned, like it's made on such a razor thin margin that if it's not an enormous hit, it's gonna die a death. And probably so too will the company that made it. So they're focusing now, and in the same way that, you know, Anitube, this is basically the Anitube problem writ large onto modern anime. There's so much anime being made right now that it can't possibly all survive, right? So they focus on the stuff that's making money. And that right now is, you know, not magical girls, idol shows, school romances, because those are cut and copy paste. And like, again, referencing back the video, find and replace scripts. It's easy. This is the way that shows are made because this is the way that shows are made. There's no a forethought put into it.